Hey, welcome back to Recently Played. We're just about halfway through 2023, which means that it is time for me to look back on my favorite albums of the year so far. So let's get right into it. In no particular order, let's start off with Wow by Kate This album just made me smile. It is fun, it is wacky, it is a great break away from reality and into absurdity. I love the influence of the video game series Katamari Damacy. I think she really nailed the vibe of it in this album. And there's really just a lot of depth and dynamics throughout the album. There's many points where it just kind of gets so minimal and deconstructs itself entirely. Ambient and minimal music isn't usually so much fun, but I think that Kate really has a knack for it, and this was a wonderful follow-up from her great 2020 album, Room for the Moon, which you should absolutely check out if you have not. Next up, After the Magic by Parannoul. Every time I listen to this album, I am consistently impressed by how lush, detailed, and refined it is. It is an absolutely gorgeous rock album. That beautiful, thankful, sentimental, and nostalgic vibe is so consistent from front to back. Really cool songwriting as well. The longer songs with these separate sections is definitely unconventional, but they really build up to these spectacular finales. I think it works. It is quite beautiful how this album follows up his 2021 album, To See the Next Part of the Dream, which was really more focused on these feelings of depression and existentialism. Between these two albums, it's almost like you're hearing this journey of someone's personal growth and emotional development. Where on the last album he would say, "What's the point of continuing living? I am a total loser." He now says, "Hey, remember those tiny, insignificant moments? The ones you've always taken for granted? Those were pretty nice." Next up, New Neighbors by Homecomings. Very solid, well-produced alternative rock album from the Japanese indie band Homecomings. Slow, sure. A little bland, sure. But this very patient, repetitive album structure definitely works with their sound. Homecoming's earlier works has more of a twee pop sound, and I would say that by comparison, this is a much more refined and mature album. It almost has this adult contemporary pop direction, and I think that there is a lot of enjoyment to be had with this album if you're willing to embrace its kind of boring nature. There's a great, warm, natural feel to the production, and the performances from the entire band are just wonderful. Like the tight drumming on Us, or the subtle, breezy guitar lines on Arpeggio, and of course the excellent vocals from Ayaka Tatamino, which just match the production and the instrumentals so well. I liked their album Moving Days back in 2021, and this is simply a wonderful follow-up. Moving on, That Feels Good by Jessie Ware. I don't think I listened to an album this year that was as instantly likable as this album. And that's the entire point of it. It's an album about pleasure. It's supposed to feel good, not later, not after a few listens. It feels good right away. I think a natural consequence of that is that it's not an album I see myself going back to a whole lot in the near future, because again, it gives you everything it has all at once, and that's totally fine. This is pure disco pleasure from front to back. It is so much fun, very tight production and arrangements, and I think there's a great mix of classic sounds with bright and clear modern mixing. Jessie owns it with her commanding vocals, and the theme that pleasure is a right really propels the album forward with a sense of purpose and urgency. If you have not listened to That Feels Good yet, you should really treat yourself, because this is just such an enjoyable listen. Next, we got 12 by Ryuichi Sakamoto. The final album from one of my favorite musicians and artists of all time. Split between ambient electronic and acoustic piano, it beautifully illustrates our perceptions of death while in this kind of foggy state of recovery and while being fully conscious and aware of the frightening reality of it. Sakamoto's music has probably influenced me in my adult life more than any other artist I can think of. And just by chance, I ended up putting out my review of this album a little bit later than I was expecting to. And that just happened to be 2 days before it was announced that Ryuichi Sakamoto had passed away. In many ways, for me, it felt like the process of absorbing that album, writing about it, and then putting out that video was kind of my way of paying tribute to Ryuichi Sakamoto and his life's work. I think for anyone who is a fan of an older artist that isn't in the best of health, it's a valid concern to wonder about how much longer they have left. And I found Sakamoto's final 2 albums, Async and this year's 12, to be deeply meaningful in how they meditate on the idea of mortality. Those albums not only helped me come to terms with the passing of one of my idols, but also with the idea of death in general, the anxiety, the fear, and the beauty of it. I will be remembering for years to come how Sakamoto dedicated the final chapter of his career to exploring these terrifying and undeniably human themes. Moving on, Crépuscule 1 and 2 by Tujiko Noriko. Wonderful ambient, minimal electronic album. I said this in my review of the Ryuichi Sakamoto album, and I think it applies to this one as well. All of my favorite ambient electronic music really does reflect the human experience. This album to me feels like looking back over your life from a third-person perspective and reliving these moments of pure peace, but also observing the fear, anxiety, and excitement and wonder. In many ways, this album makes me feel of a lot of emotions that we tend to forget about as we get older. It really is a beautiful and emotional body of work. Moving on, we got ANOCHI by Gezan and Million Wish Collective. Here we go. This one is a wild ride. I enjoyed Gezan's album Clue back in 2020, and I think Gezan has a really interesting and unique way of using backing vocal chants in their music. And it just made me happy to hear how awesome this album turned out to be. I'm really glad they went for this much bigger sound with the newly formed Million Wish Collective addition to the band. With the chanting, percussion, and horns, parts of this album make you feel like you're participating in some kind of ritual sacrifice ceremony. But then there's parts of it that are a real shining beauty that rise out of the chaos. It's quite nice. I really enjoyed this contrast of extremes and the constant change of arrangements. Sometimes the mix is just so crowded and there's so much going on. And honestly, I think it's awesome. This is definitely a fun, exciting, and wild ride all the way through. Next up, Can I Not by Cosmic Boy. This is such a pleasant and enjoyable release from Korean R&B and hip-hop producer Cosmic Boy. I love producer albums where there's a clear vision that the producer wants to accomplish, and they get all of the guest features on board with that vision, and then they contribute to it in their own unique way. And there is a great palette of Korean hip-hop talent to be found on this one. In particular, I loved the verses from Seoul and Davida, who are 2 of my favorite rising Korean artists. And then, of course, we got Big Naughty on there twice, who is probably one of the most recognizable names in Korean hip-hop. And I just really liked the relaxing, positive vibes on this album. I thought it was very consistent throughout the runtime. And, I thought the romantic ballads were cool too. I think in general, this is not something we see enough of in hip-hop. And when it is done right, it can be pretty fantastic. With a Hammer by Yaeji. Finally, we got Yaeji's debut studio album, and I really like how she used the opportunity to reflect on herself. There is such an interesting and deep mix of emotions being presented on this album. I'm not entirely sure how it's supposed to make me feel, and I think it kind of does a great job of expressing those emotions and feelings that are hard to put into words. Not quite feeling sad or angry individually, but more so feeling this daze of both of them together, among other things. I liked how, even though the subject matter is quite mature, this album still had that zany and cartoony charm that can be found on her last album, What We Drew. And great metaphor of using a hammer for being determined to come to terms with your troubling emotions and memories. Certainly not an instantly likable album, not one you would want to throw on in full with a group of friends either, and that's kind of the point. It's not supposed to be an easy listen because confronting your trauma isn't easy either. But regardless, this is a very worthwhile listen and I highly recommend it. All of This Will End by Indigo de Souza, a solid indie pop, indie rock album that is absolutely beaming with emotions in the lyrics and vocal performances. Nice palette of different styles, all kind of centered around that indie pop bubble, and all of it is well produced. And just how unafraid Indigo de Souza is to be open about her insecurities, vulnerabilities, and emotions is what makes her music unique to me. Alrighty, next up we got Towelket wa Odayakana by Kaneko Ayano, which I believe translates to A Towel Blanket is a Peaceful Place. Ayano Kaneko is on a roll. This album follows a string of great albums to come out in recent years, and she also put this one out right after releasing a live solo acoustic performance at Kannai Hall, which is quite fantastic as well. First track, Watashi Tachi E, that is how you open an album. Very epic track. I love the extended jam at the end as well. I really enjoyed hearing this heavier alternative rock sound from her, even if it is only present on 2 songs on the album, the opener and the title track. Overall, this is a great continuation of her music. The production is solid, the vocals are solid, and it's got that kitschy charm that I really like about her work. Ayano Kaneko is just one of those artists that I really enjoy listening to, and because of that, she can get away with not changing things up too much. Also, it was great to get that fully acoustic version of the album. That was just a real treat. Okay, let's get into some K-pop. Next up, we got I Feel by I-DLE. Even though I was already kind of a fan, this is the I-DLE album that kind of made me go back and re-listen to their music while paying closer attention to the vocals. And now I just think that it's an element of their music that they do really well. Their last few albums have displayed a noticeable shift toward a more mainstream pop direction, and honestly, they pull it off. Again, the vocals are so well executed, and I think it just gives them a lot of flexibility. Queen Card and Allergy have great reflections on body image and social media, while maintaining a nice sense of play with the lyrics, and the pop-punk stylistic direction is quite enjoyable as well. And I just love how bright front and center the mixing is with this album. I think it goes very well with their shift towards a mainstream sound, and I think that their recent growth in popularity is very well deserved. Unlock My World by Fromis9, another solid girl group pop album. It was great to get a full-length album of original material from Fromis9. Great songwriting, particularly in standout tracks like In the Mirror and Wishlist. Plays very well from front to back. I think they do a great job of keeping up the energy throughout the track list and mixing it up with songs that are different enough from each other, but not too different to disrupt the flow. I find myself liking this album for a lot of the same reasons as 2 of my favorite K-pop albums from last year, A-Pink's Horn and Forever One by Girls' Generation. That take it or leave it K-pop sound is so well executed and combined with some great songwriting, production, and lyrics. And also the vocal performances are quite strong on this one. Now for something totally different, we got Dog Dreams by Lucy Liyou. Wow, this is a really cool experimental electronic album. A very detailed and intricate mix of recordings, soundscapes, and ASMR-like spoken word poetry. Then it just kind of morphs into something else entirely and builds to these really wonderful melancholic peaks. There is a great sense of payoff when you get to certain moments of this album. Parts of the classical piano-driven experimental sections of this album definitely gave me Ryuichi Sakamoto vibes, and unexpected but very welcomed are some fantastic vocal performances. And when I first heard those vocals, I wondered if they could have released a more traditional singer-songwriter album, but honestly, respect for combining it with this really cool experimental context. It gives this album a very unique quality. And last but not least, we got Live at Bush Hall by the one and only Black Country New Road. The band that is always full of surprises and always hard-working. After Isaac's departure from the band, we hear them moving away from post-punk and embracing the art pop, neoclassical, theatrical, and folk elements of their music with open arms. Basically, they're telling us that deep down, they're huge music nerds, and now they're gonna let it show. I'm all here for it. I love the unapologetic Celtic folk moments. I love the dramatic tension. I think this is a really cool new era for the band. One thing I found myself praising BCNR for last year that I think is worth reiterating now is just how well they complement each other as a band. With things like the flute, horns, and strings, they don't feel like they're being played by hired studio musicians. They feel like they're being played by members of the band. And I think that is an important distinction to make when listening to their music. The trading off of vocals throughout the album is relatively smooth. I'm not particularly bothered by it, but I do have a preference for May Kershaw's vocals, and I wonder if she will emerge as the lead vocalist of the band moving forward, or if they'll kind of keep it as this shared duty. Turbines/Pigs is easily one of the most beautiful songs that I've heard this year. If you're only going to listen to one song off this album, make that the track because it just encapsulates so much of what this album does well. And I'm sure the question that's on everybody's mind is where these songs are going to end up. Are they going to stay as live versions and they're just going to continue to release other music, or are they going to release a studio LP and it will have some, if not all of these songs? That'll be really cool to see moving forward. And if anything, I am more excited to see what is to come from Black Country New Road. All right, there you have it. Those are my favorite albums of the year so far. There's a lot that I still got to catch up and listen to, and there's a lot that I feel like I need to listen to more. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.